Hello everyone, welcome to the Wargaming Parrot. I'm David and today's video is going to be a special one. I'm going to be talking again to Dr Jason Crean and we're going to be discussing the role that parrot diet plays in parrot behaviour, because it is amazing how much your parrot's diet and different elements of that affects parrot behaviour. So me and Jason are going to talk through various sort of subtopics and maybe sort of shed some light on how much diet plays a role in behaviour. And I know I learned a lot of new things when I was talking to him, so let's get on with it. Hi everyone, it's David here from Wargaming Parrot, and once again I am joined by Dr Jason Crean, who's going to be talking with me about parrot behaviour and more specifically the role that parrot diet plays in parrot behaviour. We've got loads of little subsections we're going to be going through and some questions that my patrons sent in that they want some answers to. So Jason, do you want to quickly introduce yourself again, because obviously everyone knows me, but some people may, if you have missed the last video, you really should watch it. It was awesome. It's all about pellets. I'll leave a card for now. But if you haven't heard from Jason before, he's going to introduce himself now.
Thanks for having me again. So my name is Jason Crean. I am a professor of biology at St. Xavier University and in the US. And I am an aviculturist, which I've done since I was 12 years old. So I have a lot of experience. And one of my areas of interest is animal nutrition, especially when it comes to whole nutrition, whole food nutrition, and mostly I do bird work. So I have my own aviaries, excuse me, that we've been testing lots of different whole foods on for a long time. So it's I always say keeping birds is a scientific experiment that never ends, and so I do like to do whatever I can to improve the lives of the birds that I keep. So
exactly the same here. I mean, me and Sophie feel very passionately about learning and improving the lives of our birds, and the way we feed them is such an important aspect of that. And it plays into so many other things, which leads on to kind of our first topic, which is energy levels. So we've all sort of heard that if you give like human children excess sugars and other things, it makes them hyperactive. And it's quite the same with parrots. If you give them too much sugar and too much energy, and that energy is not being burnt off, it can lead to some, I suppose the word is undesirable behaviours from a human perspective. But in reality, it's just the consequence of too much sugar in a diet. And it can lead to excessive screaming. It can even make hormones worse. It can also lead to excess energy, which needs to be gotten out in some ways through toys, playing, free flight if you're properly trained in it, and all sorts of other things. So what's your thoughts on excess energy in parrots and the role diet played in that?
So I have lots of thoughts on this.
Okay.
I think that first we need to be careful that we're not anthropomorphizing and assigning what we see in humans with birds entirely. I think that we do that a lot. And it's hard not to do, right? Like it's so gut instinct for us to do. But I think that we also have to look at the types of sugars. These things are never as simple as people want them to be. And when when I see these arguments online, on social media especially, it's very often oversimplified because they're making sense of how they perceive it. So when it comes to sugars, my very first thing to say is you want to avoid refined sugars, refined carbohydrates, which you would get in processed foods like pellets. That is the worst. Like you need to completely avoid those. You need to offer carbohydrates in the form of fruits and vegetables, whole grains and things like that. Much, much, much better than refined. And we know that, right? Really any organism that gets those refined sugars, it's just not healthy for anybody. That being said, if your bird is not getting exercise, first of all, flight is not the only type of exercise. I'm tired of hearing that. I hear it constantly. There is so many ways to get your birds moving. And I know you want to talk about foraging, right?
We've got a little section on foraging.
Yeah, and that can get birds moving. So, getting your bird to hang upside down, climb around on things, work for their food, like all of that gets them to use energy in really positive ways. So exercise is really, really important, whatever form that takes. If you are concerned and you are consistently noticing behavior changes in your bird when they have certain foods, write them down. Don't just assume that you're going to remember, because a lot of people, and this is, as a scientist who teaches, undergrads how to do behavior sampling in animals, I'm very, very, very aware in why systematic data collection is important. Now those are big words. They sound like big words. All that means is you are keeping consistent records, and it could just be you scribbling some things down every day, like my birds had this to eat, I'm noticing this behavior, okay? That gives you a much, much better frame of mind and reference to go back to, so you can see what's going on with your birds. But don't just say, oh, I think he had papaya before and he was acting like this, so I'm going to stop giving papaya. That is not scientific at all. That is not factual. That is just kind of a knee-jerk response that doesn't help your bird. You don't want to deprive your bird of something that could be really positive. So, that writing things down and keeping records helps you. It helps your veterinarian. It helps anyone that's taking care of your bird if you go away. Those types of things are just really helpful. And, just get a really cheap clipboard and, a piece of paper and just keep some notes, here's, and you can even, everyone has a cell phone at this point, I think. Just take pictures of what you're feeding every day, and you can always go back and look at it by date to see, can I match a behavior that I'm seeing with a food or some kind of food? So, if you're seeing issues around like fruit sugars, first of all, the type of sugars in fruits are not the same as, the refined sugars we talked about earlier. And those are often more metabolically healthy than anything. But once again, there's another F word. Usually I say the F word is fat. Now it's fruit. People are thinking fruit is evil and it's terrible for birds, and they're hearing all this thing. That is not true. If you are concerned with too much sugar because you have what I think you call a perch potato, right? If you have one of those, you can offer lower sugar fruits. You can easily search online for low carb fruits. Berries are fantastic. No bird should be deprived of berries. They're high in bioflavonoids, which give them their colors. Those are antioxidants, which are, keep cells healthy. Other types of fruits like high fiber fruits, apples and pears are high in fiber. Those are great. And more unripe fruits. So, I like to feed green bananas to my birds. Higher in starch, lower in the readily available sugars that can go right into the bloodstream. And let's face it, birds are eating a lot of unripe things just to avoid competition with other animals in the wild. So, and that's a generalization, but it's something that we know we've seen. So, the lower sugar fruits, there's plenty of them out there. Get an unripe papaya maybe instead of a totally ripe papaya sometimes, things like that if you're seeing problems. But and then I'll end this part with just saying nothing should be the predominant part of the bird's diet. You should be diversifying. So if fruit is more than 25% of the diet, that's problematic, not because it's fruit, but because you're giving too much of one thing. So just keeping in mind that you should be diversifying so that you can cover all those nutritional bases. And that also will help you, alleviate the sugar issue.
Yeah, I mean, moderation is so important. Like as we've discussed in a previous video, and when you discussed with Sophie, just having that diversity in diet, because nothing is necessarily bad in moderation, apart from obviously things that are bad. You know what I mean? Like fruit's good. A bit of seed is good. It's all good. And as you mentioned about the processed sugars, a lot of our clients who tend to have, or especially like people who are inexperienced with parrots, they get certain pellet brands which are very high in processed sugars. And then they wonder why there's an issue, especially when the exercise is not being done. And it's quite it's quite sad to see, really, that this is pushed as, I'm trying to not tread on any toes here, but it's pushed as a whole diet, and it's just really not. And it's full of sugars and other things that aren't very desirable. But that's the whole other topic which you've already covered, so let's avoid that one.
Yeah.
Something interesting though,
spot on.
The whole unripened fruit thing. So as with an anthropomorphic view, we would think that ripened would be better, because if I eat an unripe banana, I'm going to be on a toilet for a good hour, whereas in by birds eat, it's actually better for them. And that's something I haven't really looked into with Sophie much, because most of the time when we do give them fruit and bananas, it tends to be in moderation. It tends to be when I have it. So I'll have like 3/4 of it, and I'll portion up the rest, and I'll give it to the parrots so let them enjoy it. So it'd be very interesting to try them on unripened fruit and see what they like and what they enjoy from it. So the other part of this sort of extra sort of section is the energy levels. Now, Sophie mentioned perch potato to me, and I've never heard that before. I've heard couch potato, lounge lizard, and I found it quite amusing. So it made me think, because this isn't something I've really investigated before, which reminds me as well, we do the whole note-taking thing. We're a bit behind it. We tend to use a notepad and write them down, but you do have the notes app on your phone. So as Jason said, you can take a photo, quickly jot down a day in a notes app, and then you have this lovely reference for any problems that you can sort of look at. But anyway, distraction. So I was wondering, if you have a perch potato, can the diet have an impact in that? So would high carbs, high fat, high sugar lead to lethargic behavior from a parrot? Because it's not something I've really looked into before. I wanted your opinion on it.
Yeah, I mean, I wish there was funding to do more studies on this, and avian nutrition in general is just lacking in research. There's just no funding for things like that. Do I think that diet plays a role in that? Absolutely. Do I think that exercise is equally or more important? Yes, I do. Do I think that there are some things in the diet that people have a false sense of security when feeding? Yes. And I think, when we talk about processed foods, like you said, they're not complete. No matter what's on the diet, on the bag, doesn't mean they're complete. And we know that processed food is not good in general. And so that processed food, which is often comfort food, and there's often sugars, your refined carbohydrates in there because it makes us feel good, right? When we're eating it. Birds are no different, and, just because your bird likes something doesn't mean it's good for it. I see this every single day. Your bird may like a beer now and then. You shouldn't be giving it to them. I mean, I've seen it, I've seen it. Stop it. So, I think that a lot of factors play a role in, a bird becoming a perch potato or inactive, because we're not making them work for their food. We're not in, trying to engage them in naturalistic behaviors where they would expend energy. I think too many people want to baby their birds and make things easy for them because they want their bird to like them. And you're doing the opposite. You're, by making everything easy and convenient for your bird, you're not helping them. I use the words tough love a lot when it comes to keeping our animals. That doesn't mean we're starving them. That doesn't mean we're hurting them. It means we're trying to give them what's best for them so that they will have a better quality of life. They won't just be surviving in our homes, they'll be thriving, and they'll have better longevity, because they should be living a long time and they're not.
Diet plays an important role in that. I mean, so this ties into something we can talk about a little bit later, which is reinforcement motivation and encouraging your bird to do these behaviors and expel energy through not necessarily flight, but all sorts of things, got foraging and all sorts of activities. And there's something else occurred to me while I was listening, and the lack of research. Now, it is a big experiment, and by taking these notes and sort of like observing our birds, you can almost contribute to that research yourself. As a bird owner. You can be part of this big experiment and feeding that information, and not necessarily just anecdotal, properly recorded information into the system and talking about it with people, getting their experiences, can start building consensus amongst them. So you can actually be part of this. Everyone watching this video can start being part of this. What does your parrot eat? How impacts does it have? Start observing them, because one of the things I enjoy most about having a parrot is watching them. Sometimes I'll just sit there and I'll watch them and I'll see what they're doing in the cage. When they're out and about, assuming I'm not doing any training or any other activities, I'll watch how they forage, what they go for first, what foraging activities are more entertaining for them from obviously an anthropomorphic view. You know, I'm trying to just observe it. And it's just interesting. And I think it's something everyone can take part in and be lots of fun to do. So hopefully a lot of you will be inspired to actually do this as well.
Yeah, and it's, I think a lot of people have a misunderstanding of how science works, because we've been really bad at teaching people how science works in schools worldwide. It's a problem I see, because I train science teachers as well everywhere in how to get students to be better problem solvers and really look at data and be critical, thinkers. And it's a problem everywhere. And I think when people say, like, show me a study, that's not science. You can't just show a study. A study doesn't prove anything, right? It's the consensus that builds over time with all different types of data that come into play. That is when that's why we know processed food isn't good for us, right? Because there's a consensus from decades of research. I'm not going to show you a single study. You need to do the research and look at the plethora of studies out there that show us what happens to food when it's excessively heated and, to the point of dryness. And we've been lied to by marketing for so long about, oh, these cereals are so healthy for us. And it's like, no, they're not. They don't give you 100% of your nutrients like they claim, or they're enriched and all this other stuff. It's just a fallacy. And so, knowing how science works is the first step. And not all science is peer reviewed. A lot of science comes through as common knowledge and what we see on a regular basis, what phenomena we observe and figure out what they mean and that sort of thing. So like you said, we're all part of this experiment if we want to do what's best by our birds. So start collecting some data.
Definitely. I mean, when I was doing my animal management course, because I'm sort of catching up on all this education, because I said my background's completely different in education, I was just like interested about how much one of the lecturers talked about what you just talked about. Like, not all data comes from papers and whatever else. It comes from people in the field working with, in this particular case, we're talking about cows, and data from farmers and animal husbandry practitioners, all sorts of people looking at cows and feeding this data through to get a better understanding and a consensus about what was going on. Now, I'll have to refer to the notes originally to remember what the actual topic was, but that message stuck with me, and it made me think, yeah, I can be empowered through this, and so can everyone else, and it's just very useful. And you are right, it's not a whole other topic in education in general about how things are portrayed and how it's done in a very conveyor belt system, but I'm not going to go into that because that would get me off. That set me off on whole other topic. So let's move on to the next subsection before I do start, and that's on hormones. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about parrot hormones and the role that diet can play in that, and it may tie into the energy levels as in a small aspect. Some people say obviously that excess fat, excess sugars, excess carbs, and processed sugars especially can lead to more hormonal behaviour. Now, it's a generalization because hormonal behavior is triggered by all sorts of things. It can be seasonal, it could be due to environmental factors, it could be due to what's in the cage, etc., etc. But just for this sort of video, I want to focus on the diet aspect and get your thoughts on what role does diet play in hormonal behavior.
So, and just as a segue from what you just said, most of hormonal behavior, in my opinion, and through my observations, has been from environmental changes. It could be a TV on. You don't think that is necessarily triggering anything in your birds, but that light and activity is extending their photo period. So yes, you may have their cage over to the side. Yes, it may be dark, but if they're awake, and that can trigger those hormonal behaviors. I remember sitting on a panel at a conference a few years ago, and it was 4 veterinarians, myself, and 2 conservation biologists. And someone had asked this question that you just asked. And one of the vets spoke up and said, oh, I think that if you're giving your bird all of this diversity, all of this delicious food, they're going to get hormonal. And I said, well, I have to respectfully disagree. I said, if they're getting if you don't feed a diverse diet, and then on Saturday you have time and you're going to give them all of this food, then yes. I mean, I see social media influencers out there who are offering these giant plates full of food with squashes stuffed and everything, and I'm like, this isn't
overabundance.
Yes, it's not. This isn't a positive thing. So, if you see that, run. But when it comes to when it comes to offering a diverse diet, diversity is not the problem. Diversity is not going to cause your bird to be hormonal. It's the lack of diversity, and then more diversity, and then back and forth. It's really the lack of consistency. And so, I've never had hormonal birds, and I've kept countless species, like tons of different species. I don't have hormonal birds because my birds are going to get a diverse whole food diet every single day. They're not going to all of a sudden get this enormous amount of food. Are they going to get half of a small pumpkin now and then to forage with their food? Yes, but I'm taking their food that they normally would get and I'm putting it in that. So it's not an overabundance all of a sudden. It's just a different way. And my birds are used to change. So they're not going to react to change as severely as someone who's had a bird for 3 months, and then all of a sudden they're giving it a ton of, all of this food or all of the stimulation, and then they wonder why their bird is acting out, right? So it's the consistency that's most important. It's not the type of food. And there are many breeders out there who we have learned so much from. And they will use austerity diets, especially in like finches and things like that, where they will feed them a more bland diet in their off season, and then they will hit them with added nutrition during breeding season to simulate the naturalistic behaviors that these birds are accustomed to. So, in the wild. So, they've evolved to act this way and go through these changes seasonally, but we want to limit that with our pets so that we're not on the receiving end of those undesirable behaviors. So it's more than anything. Don't slack off and not give your birds a fresh, diverse diet for a week, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, I have time now, I'm going to do it. There's many ways to streamline it. It's not expensive. You can store food. There's just so many different ways, and we're all here to help you figure that out.
I mean, that's one of the arguments that people have made for pellets, because there's obviously that effort and they don't want to go through the trouble of making this diverse diet. So they think everything's included. The packet says it's all included, so I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. It's nice and simple. And that's one of the problems, because it doesn't really provide it, as we've said earlier in this video and in the pellets video. So it's important to remember that, keep the diet consistent and don't do it all suddenly. Don't create a massive overabundance suddenly, because that's going to cause trouble. And then when you have other environmental factors, which I've covered in so many other videos and talked about, it's just something you need to start eliminating. And you can use the scientific method to work out what the potential triggers are and what is causing your bird to be hormonal or overtly aggressive.
In the consultations, in some of the consultations I've done, hormonal problems have ceased when they've removed the processed pellet from the diet.
Yeah, exactly the same.
Soy, refined sugars, like there's all kinds of things in there that could be seen as triggers. So, we don't know really what's triggering these things. There's no blood test that we can use to see what the cause and effect relationship here is. But we do see when those birds come off of those highly processed, ultra processed foods, that we don't see these issues anymore. And I mean, I have birds who have access to natural light all the time, and the days are getting longer. I don't have hormonal problems. I mean, I don't. I don't. So.
That's good. I mean, ours are pretty good as well recently. I mean, we had some hormonal problems when we first got the rescues, because obviously their past experiences weren't ideal. But again, changing those diets, making them more diverse, and putting in the effort as well to work with them and work out all of these triggers has settled it down massively. And it's just quite rewarding to see from our perspective, as not just people who work and do content with parrots, but actually from a personal perspective as a parrot owner, seeing that change and positive impact. Which leads on to our next topic, which is foraging diversity. Now, I'm a big fan of foraging. I love watching it. I know you're a big fan of foraging based on what you just said. And I've actually got a video which I made on the importance of foraging, which I'll leave a card for now, so you can watch that and as we discuss it as well. It's just a natural behavior. They spend a lot of time doing it in the wild. It encourages exercise, as you just mentioned as well, because, you know, having to use their muscles. For example, if they're on a tray, they're having to root around there. They're climbing on things. It depends if you have cage toys or outside. It varies, some variable ways of exercise and enriching. It's just so good. But from your perspective, I want to ask, how do you encourage foraging for your parrots? What sort of activities do you have for your parrots that encourages foraging?
So avoiding giving them their food in the same way every day. That's key. Like I said earlier, we want to cater to our birds. Stop it. Don't do that. Like, keep them used to change. It's really important that they're used to change. So some days it may be, you know, on a plate. Some days it may be in a bowl. Some days it may be in a foraging device of some kind, like those cages that you can stuff with nuts and other items. They make out of that bulletproof plastic. They make those balls and things like that you can stuff with food. Just, there's all kinds of ways to deliver food and make the birds work for it. One of my good friends, with her macaws, she just likes to stuff things in paper bags and throw them in the cage and let the birds have at it. So they're, you know, it can be very, very simple, but you're trying to get birds to work, think, problem solve to get to their food. That's not cruelty. That is more beneficial than you could ever know. And so there's tons of different ways, you know, using some foods to cover up other foods. Like, I love to throw leafy greens on top of other things. And then, you know, if the birds eat them, great. If they're tossing them, it's still giving them a better experience, you know, foraging experience. And then giving them different types of foods so that they're using them, they're exhibiting different behaviors. So, you know, it may be that they need to use their foot to brace something to, you know, to eat it. That they're getting different textures and tastes when, you know, when they're interacting with the food. It could be a skewer where they just have, you know, whole pieces of fruit and veggies or things like that on the skewer, so that they have to work to get it off. You know, tearing and things like that. Like, you want like Godzilla destroying Tokyo type behavior, right? That's what you want. You want your birds interacting with their environment and really, really acting, you know, behaving, which is what they should be doing, instead of just sitting near a bowl, grabbing what they like, and then sitting there the rest of the day. That's a boring life. And so we can all do better when it comes to foraging.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's so important. And as Jason said, it's so easy to do. You know, I've talked about trays, but it can be as simple as getting a paper cupcake case, putting some of the foods in there and then scrunching it up, just so they have to actually interact with it, remove it, to get the treats out, tear it potentially. Our conures love doing that. The boys, they love foraging on the ground. You can even cater to your species, because some birds may be more natural ground feeders, so you can provide elements like that. If they're tree feeders, you can provide, for example, something hanging, a ball, for example, where they have to peck at it. It's just this, yeah, I'm complete agreement. It's such a great thing. There's so many different ways you can provide it.
Yeah, and you know, even things that we normally think, even things normally that we think are for big birds, like in-shell nuts, like for your conures, crack them in half and let them work at getting them out of the shell. That's work for a conure, and that's beneficial. Everybody wins that way. So, you know, just think about how you can make it a little bit harder for your birds to get to their food, while keeping in mind, you know, that they need to eat. So, you know, you need to observe what they can and can't do and how you can, work them. But I often say you do these things in successive approximations, which are just steps. You just work in steps to get them foraging, in a more positive way.
Definitely. Introducing things in small steps is a great way. And there's a lot of scientific terms, but when you just put them into plain English, they're very, very simple concepts.
Yep.
For example, I use something called a treat hierarchy, which sounds quite technical, but in reality, it's just finding out what your bird's favorite treat is. I mean, it's all very simple when you break it down. Yeah. And for example, as you just said, Scampy, we've got this quite large plastic ball for him. The other conures don't really like it at the moment. We're still trying to get him used to it, but he loves it. You put some stuff in there, he'll roll it around, he'll try and really work, manipulate to get the bits out. Yeah. I think the whole nut idea would be quite a good one, especially for Olive, because her beak is very strong. We haven't tried that yet, so that's something we're going to add to our repertoire. Mm-hmm. Right, the next section is on reinforcement motivation. Now, I think this is one of the very most important topics when it comes to diet and parrots, because it's something that's very often overlooked. We talked about the pellets, for example, especially the sugary ones. If your parrot's getting all of their fun things, all of these things from a pellet source, sugars, they're not going to feel motivated to work or do things for their treats. They're not going to want to forage, not going to want to do things. And if you want to do some training with them, it's going to make that a lot harder as well. So I mentioned the treat hierarchy, and that allows you to find out what their top tier treats are. What is their favorite? For example, the boys is millet, like for most cockatiels. So once you found that out and you're limiting the diet somewhat more, you can start using that treat to get them to do things and encourage them to forage, encourage them to do all sorts of fun things. And I feel that's very important. It can also be even that important to bonding success as well. We've had so many clients who said, my parrot doesn't want to bond with me, parrot's not interested in me. And the very first place I've gone to is diet and treat reinforcement motivation. And it's often been a game changer for them when you take away the pellets, for example, or the all-seed diet, put them onto a healthier, diverse one and use those treats for training. I want to know what extent you agree with this, or if you have any other thoughts on the topic.
Yeah, and I think when people hear this, they tend to go into one of two extremes. Either I can't do that to my bird, I have to give it all of its food in a bowl, or because it'll hate me, or starving the birds, right? And I would always avoid any trainer that says you should be starving birds to get them motivated. You should not, and they're out there. So you definitely need to avoid that. There's a happy medium here, and what you just described it, and that is you look for the high value rewards. If you don't follow Laura Joseph from the animalbehaviorcenter.com, you need to go check her out. She is the most common sense, straightforward, no nonsense trainer who can help. I mean, she just helps so many people with training their birds and forming better relationships with their animals. But we work, we do some consulting together, and that's one thing that we talk about all the time is figuring out what is that high value motivator, what are they going to work for, and then removing that from the diet so that we can use it during training. I have training in animal training, but nothing remotely close to how Lara can operate. And so, if we're looking at something like toucans, blueberries are almost always the highest motivator. Doesn't matter what species, blueberries seem to really do it, and they swallow them whole. So it's very easy to just offer one blueberry at a time for each thing that they're doing, each behavior that they're exhibiting. Hornbills, mealworms. Parrots, nuts, usually pine nuts. Like you can chop pine nuts in half or in quarters and offer those in small bits to a lot of birds. And they're expensive, so I prefer to use them where I know they're not going to get wasted during training. So that helps. But there's lots of different things. You just have to figure out what that motivation is. Make sure it's healthy. It doesn't have to be junk. It doesn't have to be junk food. It should be healthy. But there are definitely things that you need to offer that are going to be those high value reinforcers for the behaviors you want to see.
I mean, you mentioned portioning them out as well. That's also very important because some people make the mistake of, for example, offering a whole nut when you could portion it out. If you offer the whole nut, the behavior may have been forgotten by the time they finish that nut. So you won't, and you also slow down your training session. So portioning it out appropriately is important. A lot of people with millet this is something we encounter over and over again, is they'll offer a whole sprig of millet. And not only does that create a false impression of what that parrot's working for, they think, oh, wow, I'm going to get the whole sprig of millet. Also, it takes ages for them to go through it. So if you have a little bud and a couple of bites from it for every behavior, it extends your training session, extends their interest, and increases their motivation. I'll leave a link to the treat hierarchy video. I wasn't going to, but just in case any of you guys want a quick reference for it, it's just there and it may help you out in your training. So
yeah, and just with the portion sizes that you just mentioned, with my black palm, with training, a quarter of a pine nut is what I'm going for. A big bird, a very tiny morsel. And that's really important because I want to bridge the behavior so that he knows why he's getting this treat. He can pair that with a behavior. I know some people use clickers or whistles or things like that, some kind of bridge, but and then he's eating it quick enough to where I can go right back to him doing the behavior again to reinforce it again. So, little bits,
exactly,
little
small portions, guys, small portions. I mean, also on the topic of clickers and bridges, it doesn't always have to be a clicker. For example, with our conures, we noticed that noise was overstimulating for them and it actually distracted them from the behavior. You can just use a verbal bridge. You can just simply say good, and then it gives you the second or so you need to get from your pouch or a ramekin, whatever you want to get that treat to them. It doesn't always have to be a clicker. That's another one of those misconceptions that people hear training and they think automatically think clickers. Clickers are great and they work really well, but sometimes it's not always the best thing to use.
Yeah, and the reason a clicker is usually more desirable, and I completely agree with everything you just said, is because it's consistent. It makes the exact same sound all the time. So if you are using a verbal cue, Lara Joseph does good. And she says it the same way with the same intonation every single time. It's not good or good or, like she doesn't enunciate. It's always the same. Good. It's very consistent. They know what it means. So just be consistent when you're training. You don't have to be consistent with the reinforcers. Those treats can vary, but you definitely want to be consistent with the bridge so they know, okay, what I just did right now is ideal.
That's what you want. That's good.
I need to do it again. Yes, exactly.
Cool. I wanted to say I'm very jealous you have a black palm. I follow you on Instagram, and obviously seeing it is one of my dream birds to have. So one day, hopefully, I'll be trading with bits of pine nut with a black palm. They're beautiful, beautiful birds.
Yeah, he has a little bit of a beak deformity. So the breeder and I worked together, knowing that I wasn't going to breed him and he was going to be used for education purposes. So I feel really blessed and honored that she allowed me to take him. So he's a hoot.
That's cool. Hoot. So cool. Right, so now we've covered our main topics. There was a few questions that we had from patrons, and I just wanted to cover them quickly as well. So one of the topics they wanted to ask, and Sophie was interested in this as well, actually, is behaviours. This may be anecdotal. We sort of discussed before we started this a little bit. Are there any sort of behaviours from vitamin deficiencies or excess? For example, eclectuses apparently toe tap or get itchy skin caused by some grains. Now, what is your opinion on that topic? Is that a thing, or is it not really researched enough yet?
So I follow and have followed for a few decades Eclectus Arc. Their Eclectus Arc is online. It's Lisa Woodworth, Lorella Desborough. Lorella has worked with Eclectus forever, decades. And so you definitely need to follow them. They can do so much more justice when it comes to Eclectus.
I'm 100% going to do so now.
So definitely check them out. But I had an Eclectus, and he was toe tapping, and this was probably 25 years ago. And that was really when we started to notice that pellets weren't what they were cracked up to be. We removed the pellets from the diet. He never did it again.
Oh, really?
When I brought him to Dr. Karen Becker, who, that was around the time I met her for the first time. If you don't follow Dr. Karen Becker, you need to follow her. But she said, it's hypervitaminosis. They can't handle all of these synthetic vitamins that are being packed into this processed food, and it manifests itself in toe tapping, wing flicking, just irritated behaviors, I would call them. So that's from excessive vitamins, hypervitaminosis. I don't think there's hard and fast behaviors that come directly from some of these foods. I think that we are dealing with many different species of parrots who have all evolved very differently to occupy very specific niches in their environments. And so to generalize something like this is really difficult, just based on behavior. I think that some can absolutely have negative responses to certain types of foods. But by and large, what I've seen, it's from the processed foods, even cooked foods, that have refined. I think people think they're doing their birds a favor when they cook for them. Stop cooking for them. Don't give them pasta. They don't need any of that stuff. Let their bodies work with the food that nature intended it to be, and let their bodies do the rest of the work. But I think when it comes to eclectus, especially, it's from excess nutrient, excess vitamin.
Okay, interesting. It kind of leads on to the next question, and now this is something again that I'm sort of catching up on, and I'm not sure about. So I think you're the person to go to for it. And that is a question of: do birds suffer from any allergies? Are they prone to allergies?
So once again, that's difficult because we're generalizing across different species who've obviously evolved in very different habitats. Any animal can have allergies because an allergy is an immune response that can be damaging to the body in response to something in the environment. And that could be environmental, it could be something they ingest, those types of things. But for some reason, they're hypersensitive to it. And it could be that they just haven't been exposed to it before. I mean, who knows, right? The body has a way of defending itself. And histamines are released, and those are compounds in the body that produce that immune response. And inflammation can accompany that. We want to limit inflammation. Even inflammation is a really important immune response, but it also, when prolonged, is very, very problematic and painful to birds, to any animal. Humans are walking around with all kinds of inflammation because we eat things that are terrible for us. And so, you want to reduce inflammation, you increase those antioxidants and those healthy foods, those healthy raw foods, and that will help bring that down. Those healthy fats, and this is a big problem where people, don't want to feed fats to their birds, and they need omega-3 fatty acids because those bring down inflammation. You're going to get those from nuts and certain seeds and things like that. So, anything can have allergies. I know a friend of mine has 2 Amazons that have seasonal allergies, and when the pollen count is up, her birds start sniffling and they have clear discharge and everything. I formulated a tea that helps with that. And when she offers that during that season, she says they have no symptoms. As soon as she runs out of the tea, the symptoms come back during that season. So she's like, hey, can you send me some tea? So, there are ways to help, reduce those, those allergic reactions to things. But so much of it's guesswork because we really don't know. We don't take our birds to the vet to have them allergy tested for things. That being said, I think that there is a lot of speculation when it comes to diet and allergies that animals that we keep being allergic to certain things. I often hear like, oh, my dog and or cat are allergic to chicken. And almost always they're allergic to the cooked chicken because those proteins change when they're heated, especially to the point of dryness where they're in a pellet, right? A kibble. And I've had dogs that came to me through rehoming where they say, they're allergic to chicken, and I give them raw meat-based diets that are balanced, and they have no reactions whatsoever. Actually, they never have another allergic reaction again. So I think the same can be said for parrots. I think that if we're giving them, whole raw foods that you're going to have a lot less problem than if you're giving them highly processed foods that chemically alter when they're heated.
I think the pellets, again, back to the pellets again, certain types of pellets do have that impact on things. But we also almost come full circle as well, because if you're worried about your bird having a certain allergy, you just observe and you take notes and you work out if there is a thing, because you can't necessarily go to your vet and have it allergy tested. It's very difficult to do. I'm not even sure if there's actually a test for it for many types. So you can use a process of elimination, a scientific process of elimination, and work it out. I mean, we believe that Chip may have a certain allergy, and we're trying to work out if there is an element in the food that's doing it or something else in the environment, for example, but not impossible. So we're trying to work that out currently, whereas all the other birds are completely indifferent to everything. They're happy eating everything that you give them. And yeah, it's just they're pretty happy. But yeah, it's just about being observant, basically, and avoiding, as Jason said, some of those processed foods, which are probably going to be more likely to cause an irritation or inflammation than a raw whole food, for example. From a personal perspective, I'm trying to improve my diet for very similar reasons, because I have some minor irritations, and I'm quite sure they're due to the amount of rubbish I eat. The birds probably eat better than me at this point, so I'm trying desperately to improve that, to improve how I feel. So it's very important to do. So did you have any final thoughts, Jason, before we wrap things up? Because once again, I'm very pleased you agreed to join me on here, and I'm very grateful for you taking your time out of your day to talk to us about these topics. And if there's any sort of final thoughts on the topic about behavior and diet?
Yeah, and I'm honored to be here, so I appreciate you asking me. I think the best way to tackle pretty much all of the issues we discussed today was diversifying the diet consistently with whole food. And you can't go wrong. I think that's going to give your birds those all of those compounds that are going to keep them healthy and not just surviving but thriving. And that's really what it's about. So
sounds good. So there you go, guys. Thank you very much for joining us. As usual, I'll leave as many links as I can in the description so you can follow Jason, Karen Becker, anyone else. Hopefully I'll get a list from you a little bit later, and hopefully welcome you back to the channel at some point in the future to discuss other issues and topics, because I don't know about you, but I'm very pleased to have you here, as I said, and it just opens up my eyes to certain topics as well. For example, allergies is all new information for me, whole nuts to our conures, and it's just very educational and useful. So thank you once again for joining me.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, guys, take care, and we'll see you later. So guys, thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this interview useful and helpful in understanding parrot diet and its relation to parrot behaviour. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them down in the comments. I'd also like to thank Jason again for coming onto my channel. It was a pleasure as always, and it was so interesting and enlightening. I know I got some ideas, as I said right at the start of the intro, and one of those ideas is literally giving Olive some sort of shelled nuts with holes drilled in them to destroy, because she loves destroying harder things, and it's going to be a lot of fun for her. But in the meantime, for everyone, take care and have a really good day.